G'day and welcome to this City Point podcast. I'm joined today by Declan Hooper from Wickets and Pickets. My name is Phil Dillon. Plenty to talk about. Unfortunately, not much live cricket. It's all probably, we're talking about cancellations and postponements, etc., etc. Declan, we'll start first with the Afghan tests being cancelled or presumably cancelled by Cricket Australia because of the Taliban situation in Afghanistan. What are your thoughts on that? It's a pretty sticky situation, I think.
Yeah, I think, unless the Taliban change their mind, which doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon, I think it is a cancellation, which, it's a tough one because, I'm quite conflicted. I think, in a way, it does send a strong message to the Afghani cricket board and ultimately the Taliban that the rest of the world won't just sit there and let them watch as women are discriminated like that. But then, at the same token, I think you look at Afghan. It's a real shame for the actual Afghani cricket team because they've come on leaps and bounds in the last 5 years, and they're not anything to do with this. They're just, unfortunately, a disposable part in what seems to be like a political chess match. It's a really, really tough situation for them. And the only other example I can draw upon seems to be the apartheid in South Africa. There's a similar thing. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the dominoes fall as far as ICC and any other future tests as far as Afghanistan is concerned, because I think this might have a ripple effect on the rest of cricket and any future plans that Afghanistan have to play cricket on an international level.
It says, I was reading an article in the Australian by Gideon Haigh about saying that it could actually have an adverse effect for the women in Afghanistan and give the Taliban a bit more punch behind their argument as well, that pulling out a test match, it might seem like a good thing, but it's also maybe like a hollow gesture as well, sort of like give the women should be given more support in Afghanistan rather than taking this away. It's almost like taking it away gives the Taliban more oomph, and then they would say, right, this is what you're doing to our by you playing sport. This is what you're doing for our Afghan cricketers, the men's side of it. So you've got to keep out of all sport or whatever. So it's a very difficult situation. I'm not sure whether Cricket Australia should be getting in this side of the argument at all, or we should just be playing cricket and then let the politicians sort out the other side of it.
Well, I do think that also, we've seen a lot of this in recent weeks, but the ICC should be the essentially they should be the governance of cricket, and at the moment they just seem like a glorified events company. Because, everyone's suiting their own agenda. These cricket boards are taking their own agendas and their own sides. Who's to say that Australia the CA should be cancelling test matches? I to a sense, I agree with the sentiment behind it, if it is their genuine sentiment, which I'm 50-50 about. But at the end of the day, the ICC should be the governance of cricket, and it should be up to them if they are going to take a political stance against the Taliban and ultimately the Afghani cricket board. It shouldn't be up to the Australian cricket board. They're just one part of the ICC. To me, it's kind of it shows where the powers lie within cricket. I think, we've been saying this for ages, but I think, Australia would be happy if they only played India and England and possibly New Zealand. They clearly have shown contempt for the emerging nations for a good while now. And I think, look, if it is wholly and solely to do with the mistreatment of women in Afghanistan, then I'm fully for that. But I do think there's some mediating factors behind this. Look, we look at the ICC T20 World Cup and the fixture congestion that's already occurring within cricket. I think it's convenient for them to cancel this one. But I do think it does a lot of harm to Afghani cricket, one, but then also, let's not forget, this is the only test match in Tasmania this summer. And I mean, look, Tasmania's got a rich cricketing history, and they seem to just be left behind the rest of Australia. So I do feel sorry for, the Tasmanian people and Tasmanian cricket as well, who have clearly lost a lot of revenue over the past 2 years as well.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, this would have been the first test match for Australia's cricketers, whichever side they put out, for almost since the Indian series at the end of last January. So they haven't played a test match since January, which leading into the Ashes is not ideal preparation. Whether I agree with you with the sentiments of it as well. It's obviously we want Afghan women to play sport. By the same token, like you say, I agree with you that the ICC should be the ruling ruling body in cricket, and they should be the ones that taking this stance. And they should be the ones that are taking the stance on all whether all cricket should go ahead. Seems to me that these individual bodies like the Cricket Australia, BCCI, English Cricket Board, etc., have too much power, and therefore they're having too much say. When did the ICC come in and say, right, okay, this is our baby,
ultimately now the ICC, as I said just then, are a glorified events company. They organise a T20 World Cup, a World Championship final, and a 50-over World Cup. And apart from that, they just let the boards, bicker between themselves. Literally, it's like if you went to the governance of cricket, governance cricket, you know what I mean? Like it's a joke as far as I'm concerned. But then on top of that, right, I think drilling down this case, right, I think if Australia was serious about, this, I think this is serious about emerging nations. I think this is a perfect opportunity to get your Zimbabwe's or your Ireland out to play a one-off test match in Australia if they've taken the stance that they are not supporting Afghani cricket anymore, which, I mean, I can understand. But let's not forget that they cancelled this test last year because it was too hard because of COVID. I mean, they got India out. They managed to do it with India, but there was meant to be a one-off test match at the WACA against Afghanistan last year, and it just never came to pass. I just wonder,
Declan, whether if it had been like an Indian test match or an England, how much they would have gone to that trouble to cancel it. It does seem to be that, okay, it's only Afghanistan. That's what seems to be the thing. It's like some people might read into it. It's only Afghanistan. It's only Pakistan. It's only New Zealand. It doesn't matter in the scheme of things. If it'd been England, India, South Africa, whatever, then they would have gone to another level to try and keep it there, I think, possibly. It sounds cynical, but I think that might be the way it is.
That's why I wanted to, because, I mean, obviously I wasn't around during apartheid, but I just wonder what the domino effects of this will be if the ICC decide to take a similar stance to the Australian Cricket Board, which I think is 50-50 at the moment, but they could very well. What the overall landscape of cricket, how that falls. I think we've seen a resurgent Afghani cricket it's come on leaps and bounds in the last 5 years. I mean, taking scalps against West Indies and Pakistan. You got Rashid Khan being probably the best spinner in short format cricket. You've seen, your Majid playing in the BBL. Like, I think it's a real worry that you could just scrap what is one of the good stories within cricket of the last 5-10 years.
Well,
you could just go to the wayside.
You just have a look, like Rashid Khan, you mentioned him there now, he has just pulled out, has decided that he's not going to be captain for the Afghan side for the T20 World Cup. What that means for Afghani cricket in the short term, who knows? Does that mean he's not going to play in the T20 World Cup? What does that mean for the T20 World Cup in general if Afghanistan pull out?
Yeah, I think at the moment there's just so many vested interests that, like, and it's been happening more and more each time, whether it be what we saw in this summer with the quarantines. I think if people, or the likes of, as we've talked about for a long time, these emerging nations having a bit of a pro quo as far as, if they support these higher ranking cricket boards, then they might get a two test match tour in their country whenever, as a bit of a thank you. Look, we've seen the revenue share between the ECB, the BCCI and CA, almost dwarf any other cricketing nation. And I just think it's really the detriment of cricket. Like, and I think it's something that's been kind of holding us back for years now. And I think the only way you can fix it is to strengthen the ICC and have ICC as the whole and sole governing body within cricket. And I mean, theoretically, these boards should be underneath them already, but they're not. They're clearly going well above their station at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's only to the detriment of cricket, full stop. So if we do look at that situation with the last Test match cancelled at Old Trafford 2 hours before the Test match was due to start, I think it stinks, to be honest with you. It's like, first of all, how can you do that? How can you do that to the people who've paid all that money to go to a Test match at Old Trafford? We're not talking just about how much they paid for the, how many days they were going to attend a Test match. We're talking about them travelling to Manchester if they weren't living in Manchester. All the hotel money. How can you tempt to a Test match 2 hours before it's due to start on the back of the fact that 3 or 4 of the backroom staff, not the players, the backroom staff had tested positive for COVID-19. I know Ravi Shastri got COVID-19, and I do feel sorry for him. I wouldn't want to get it. I understand.
But okay, think about that. So they're all vaccinated, first and foremost. Ravi Shastri got contracted COVID after the 4th test. The 4th test still went ahead. And look, let's rewind for a second. Look, we've got to commend what has been a pretty great Test series. I mean, in India we were up 2-1. I think the way the Test series has fallen is important in the sense that, look, if this Test doesn't go ahead, that leaves India in an unassailable position as far as the series goes. I think your point is absolutely right about Manchester in the sense that, look, other than Headingley, Old Trafford's it's the premier ground in the north of England. So you've got people coming from as far as Scotland, all the way from the Midlands, all the way to Manchester for that Test, especially with it being the 5th and final Test. I think you would have had people from all over the UK coming. Secondly, I think, look, there's been COVID scares before, and I think the precedent that was really set with England pulling out of that Test in South Africa, or pulling it out that one days in South Africa, and then Australia pulling out of their Test series against South Africa. I think that's the precedent that was set that unless no one can guarantee 100% no COVID, right? I think the ECB have pretty much done as best they could. Look, they've all the players were vaccinated. They're in a COVID bubble. Everyone that was in the ground had to be vaccinated to be in the ground. I think they've tried to make it as COVID friendly as possible. The one point I was watching Nasser Hussain and Sky's coverage the other day, the one point that I will take on board and I will give it merit is the fact that it was the physio that came down with COVID. Look, none of the players tested negative at the time, but it was the physio that did test negative. And look,
positive.
I mean, you have to give that merit in the sense that he was probably doing physio work on most of the players at some point. It's a fifth test. I don't.
I think the Indian, they had 21 players, right? 21 players, particularly because of the chance that somebody could go down with COVID.
Mm.
Okay, so now if you look back at the Pakistan one-day series between England and Pakistan, England had to change 8 or 9 players from that because 7 or 8 players tested positive for COVID-19. So they were forced to change that to almost their whole team. Yet they still went ahead with that series. I don't think there is any reason for India to pull out of that final test match at all.
No, I agree.
Honestly, I think it's a complete sham that they did it. And I reckon if you look forward, and this is my cynical view on it, the reason why is if some of those players had got COVID-19, they wouldn't be able to travel to to Dubai for the upcoming.
Well, the ICC, the IPL starts in 3 days done, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is a shambles to start off with. I think the way they've shoehorned the IPL in such a crammed schedule already, I think is ridiculous, right? They've got a T20 World Cup, which again was shoehorned in. Right, the schedule's been a mess for the last year.
Yeah,
and I mean you can somewhat give it some merit because of COVID, but I think it's still been a disgrace. I do have to. Part of me has to I don't agree with any of this, but part of me does have to question why. Look, the English Cricket Board and the BCCI both knew that there's a risk of COVID. It's as minimal risk as it is, but there's a risk of COVID. And they've scheduled a test 4 days before the IPL, right?
Mm-hmm.
The BCCI, approved it. Why didn't they try and reschedule again? Like they had India were in England for the World Test Championships, and they had a month between that and
start the series earlier. I
start
totally
the series
agree.
earlier.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just totally agree. But it's just like it seems to be like a number of things that leading into this that just haven't been done right, and somebody has to be accountable for that. It's not fair on that public that
no. But
to pay all that money.
This is where I think both boards need to take responsibility because both boards signed off on this. It is fair enough to point the finger at India because I think it is clear that they didn't want to play this fifth test. It's clear. But I think you have to point the finger at the English Cricket Board as well because anyone could see this coming from a mile away, and they just went on with it with their head in the sands. And I think. Look, the general public got fucked because of this, but not only that, Lancashire Cricket got fucked because of this. They've lost all their revenue. That was their one test match for this year. They've got completely fucked from this. And now
the hotels in Manchester would have been...
the television rights. So Sky not going to pay their 30 million. So local cricket's going to... BBC Radio's not going to pay their television rights because the test didn't go ahead. I just think... Both these boards, this is what happens when you try and squeeze out as much juice as you can out of these cricketers and try and cram their schedule as close as you can. That something's got to give, and this was it. But this is why I think this whole thing reeks of people trying to get their self-interests in. The board's trying to get their own self-interest.
That's what it reeks of vested interest. And I just can't believe that they've tried to shoehorn the IPL in between that last test and the 2020 World Cup, because all it's doing is basically saying, well, the T20 World Cup, we'll just fit it in after the IPL. It's like we've got to get the IPL in it because, that makes us fucking loads of money, and that's the way it's going. And we want money. We're going to need these players to get paid loads of money because
but what happens when you've got the best cricketers in the world playing the IPL at the moment, right? What happens when some of them inevitably get injured during this IPL because they played 18 months worth of cricket and then they're not available for the T20 World Cup? So then you've got ICC not getting their piece of the pie. You've got the BCCI trying to get their piece of the pie. You've got the ECB trying to get their piece of the pie. Like it's just it's a powder keg. And this is where the ICC needs to show a bit of governance, right? And they've got their future tours plan, but it's a movable thing that's just completely.
They've been very silent on India cancelling this, pulling out of this Test match. Been very silent. And what stinks more, Dec, is that the fact that. And initially they were saying that India forfeited the test and it would have been finished 2-2. Don't forget that these test matches count for the World Test Championships, and England losing. The difference between losing and getting drawing is heaps, really big, on that account.
Look, Australia didn't get in the final because of their overrate. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I think you're 100% right. I think in that circumstance, it makes it even more of a disgrace, really. Look, if we had a strong governing body, it should be a forfeit, right? I think all protocols were in place for the play to go ahead.
Yeah,
both boards signed off.
No player tested positive.
That was the rules at the start of this. Right. Anyone test negative, you can go out. And look, if any players do test positive, throughout the test, you've got your COVID sub, right? Mm-hmm. So if players did test positive, they could have subbed them out. But as it stood, no one tested positive. And since then, no one has tested positive.
No. And surely they've got a backroom staff which is probably as big as, if not bigger, than the team.
Yeah, so, and all vaccinated as well.
Have they only got one physio? I doubt it very much. So is he the only physio that can rub?
But the thing that argument falls by the wayside.
It does,
in the sense that Ravi Shastri and his assistant, his fielding coach, tested positive in the fourth test. And they still went ahead with the fourth test.
Yeah,
because the Test series was 1-1 at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and as soon as it suits India to pull out. Look, I'm not saying this has happened at all, but it looks exactly. This is how it looks to everybody. This is how it looks to everybody.
And I think
Kevin Peterson tweeted that we pulled out South Africa, as in England, so he can't point the finger at India, but you can.
Well, I think the circumstances.
The one-day series had no effect on the world.
Not to mention, right? The one-day series was in supposedly a COVID bubble that was in front of no people.
Yeah.
Right, there was no supporters meant to be there. It was meant to be an empty stadium. The difference is it was meant to be a full Old Trafford. It had been sold out for the first 3 days. The rules of COVID had changed in the sense that the players had been vaccinated. I mean, look, then I think there needs to be protocols in place because this is going to happen again, right?
Yeah.
And look at the Euros, for instance, right? Billy Gilmore for Scotland in the Euros had to basically sit on the bench or be in isolation for Scotland's game against England because he tested positive. But the show still went on. The Scottish team didn't pull out of the Euros, did they?
No. And Mason Mount was the same for England. He had to be isolated because he been in contact with Billy Gilmore. Blah blah blah. So they didn't stop none of the Euros were stopped.
And look, let's be honest, right? What are the chances of a player contracting COVID during this T20 World Cup? I mean, it's pretty high if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely, it's high.
Well, they're going to stop the tournament.
Yeah,
of course they're not.
Of course they're not.
What happened with the IPL? Right, it took a number of players to catch COVID, a number of players and officials to catch COVID before they scrapped the tournament. Right, they were still playing while players were contracting COVID. But I mean, it suited their vested interests, so there we go.
Yeah. Well, don't forget the COVID world has changed completely over the last 2 years now, because players have been vaccinated, the bubble's there, the crowds are now back, and in all intents and purposes around the world, we're almost back to normal in terms of sporting events, etc.
I mean, other than
Australia,
other than here in Melbourne, mate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree, and I think these rules need to change, right? Because this will happen again within cricket, right? And we can't just have these cancellations forever, because people will be contracting COVID. Like, we're learning to live with COVID, whether it be in the UK or wherever else, right?
Yeah.
And it's just one of them things that, unfortunately, if you get COVID, you're going to have to do your isolation and miss your test match. But this is why they travel with bigger squads. This is why they have reserve days if need be.
I cannot see a valid argument for India to have cancelled that test match. I cannot see one. There is no one. If you look at all of the things there, look, I understand somebody's got COVID. I feel sorry for them, and I understand, but it shouldn't have had any effect on the playing of that test match at all. And to have done it 2 hours before the test match to start, it is just unbelievable that they could do that. It's unbelievable. And for the ECB and the BCCI to have that much power, and the ICC not to have said, sorry, boys, no, this isn't happening. You know, we rule that you have to play this test match.
Or you forfeit.
And if you don't play it, you forfeit. It's 2-2. The points, whatever the points go in the world.
I was reading on Quick Info that they could be India is scheduled to play a white ball series in England next year. And what they're talking about doing now is replacing that. So having a one test match series with that, which is crazy.
Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. By that stage, England could be without Jimmy Anderson, Stuart Broad, et cetera, because they're retired. Yeah. Totally different team. Completely different situation in the game. You cannot. Well, this is my argument before. We're going slightly off track here, but my argument was during COVID, the World Test Championship should be just scrapped.
Well, look,
because it's not a fair play. It's not a fair playing field.
But I agree. But now the West is like, as I said, most of the world has got on with COVID, right?
Yeah.
So let's play cricket. I think there's no excuse anymore. I don't if you're vaccinated, all your players are safe.
Yeah.
Then, if you play cricket, this is at the detriment of world cricket, right?
It is. So I think it was Kevin Peterson tweeted, or one of the ex-pros tweeted, the England player tweeted, this could be the end of Test cricket. After this sort of thing, I know maybe a little bit.
It's a bit melodramatic, that, to be honest.
Well, that's typical Kevin Peterson. But
Well, it wasn't at the end of Test cricket. Wasn't at the end of Test cricket when he fell out with Andrew Strauss.
Well, just the thing is, international cricket, the ICC, etc., and governing bodies just tend to have this tendency of shooting themselves in the foot all the time.
Anyway, we'll leave it there. But thanks for your time again, Phil. And
no worries, mate.
We'll chat again.
Maybe we should be the new ICC board.
Yeah,
me and Richard Hanson.
Well, maybe, but until next time, you have yourself a good night, and then we'll chat again soon.
Yeah, brilliant.
Cheers.
Well done, mate.